Day 7. Something had changed. The air was still heavy, thick with the weight of something watching, but the whispers had stopped. The entity no longer taunted them. The oppressive dread remained, but it was different now. Less immediate, more like a lingering presence, a breath held just before release. The 3 remaining survivors, Jake, Leo, and Aaron, sat huddled together, barely speaking. Their bodies ached, every muscle trembling from sleepless nights and unrelenting fear. Their thoughts felt slow, tangled, as if their minds had been stretched too thin. The past week had stripped them raw. As the final hours stretched on, exhaustion clawed at them. Their eyelids drooped, but they forced themselves to stay awake. They knew. The moment they let their guard down, the entity could strike. The shadows still moved at the edges of their vision, flickering in the corners of the rotting cabin, but they did not reach for them as they had before. It was as if the entity was waiting. And then, just before dawn, the temperature plummeted. A cold deeper than any winter night sank into their bones, the kind that steals breath, that freezes marrow. Their breath clouded in the icy air, shallow and strained. The fire sputtered out, frost creeping over the walls, long skeletal fingers etching across the wooden planks. Erin gasped, her lungs burning, her body locking in place as if something inside the air had turned against her. Then, the door creaked open. They froze. Beyond it, the clearing was empty. The forest, eerily still. No glowing eyes. No figures standing in the tree line. Just the wind, whispering through the skeletal branches. Jake was the first to move. His legs felt like lead, his bones aching as if they had aged decades in mere days. He took slow, deliberate steps toward the open door, expecting, waiting, for something to happen. Nothing did. He turned back, eyes hollow, motioning for the others to follow. They stepped outside, breath hitching, ready to run at the slightest movement. The frozen earth crunched beneath their unsteady steps, and their chests felt lighter, as if a weight had finally lifted. Then, as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the frozen lake, they felt it. The pressure was gone. It was over. They had survived. Their bodies were broken, their minds teetering on the edge, but they were still here. They turned back toward the cabin one last time, expecting, knowing, they would see something lurking in the doorway. But there was nothing. The place looked old, abandoned, as if it had been untouched for years. They should have felt relief. But something gnawed at them. Jake was the first to say it. His voice was quiet, but the weight of the words settled like lead in the cold morning air. There were supposed to be 7 nights. Leo swallowed, his throat dry as ash. Yeah. And 1 survivor. No one responded. Because they all knew. 3 of them had walked out. But only 1 was ever meant to. A gust of wind cut through the clearing, cold and sharp. It felt like a warning. They should have been grateful. They should have been running. Instead, they stood there, staring at each other, their breath shallow, uncertain. Why were they still alive? And who was the mistake? The air around them felt wrong again, like something unseen was hovering just out of reach, waiting for them to realize what it already knew. Jake took a slow, unsteady breath. Let's go. No one argued. They trudged toward the SUV, their bodies moving on instinct alone. Jake slid into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life on the first try, as if it had never failed. They didn't speak as they drove away, the cabin shrinking in the rearview mirror, disappearing into the dense forest behind them. The road stretched ahead. The world looked normal again. Erin finally whispered, voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. Do you think it will ever let us go? The silence in the car was too thick, too unnatural. Then, from the back seat, barely a whisper, barely a breath. Not yet. No one turned around. No one dared. And somewhere, deep in the forest, the cabin waited. Waiting for its next visitors. Or maybe, waiting for the survivors to come back.